Let me welcome you all. Thanks for coming out tonight. I'm Bill Brown with Brookings Mountain West. So on behalf of my colleagues at Brookings Mountain West, Rob Lang, Caitlin Saladino, and all of our staff, we're delighted to have you out for our first lecture of the spring series. There's printed lectures to pick up, but our schedule is also on our website. If we have your email, we can put you on a listserv. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook and get all the information about our programs and activities. Let me also thank our friends at Greenspun College who make this facility available to us and who are recording the event, so you and others will be able to see it on our website, on local public television in a few days at 3 in the morning if you have nothing better to do. I watch them. Also, for anybody who wants to take notes from any of the many slides you'll see tonight, the PowerPoint presentation will be up on our website, if not later tonight, by tomorrow. So don't worry about missing a number or a data point. You'll be able to reference that if you need to. And with that, we're thrilled to have Richard Reeves back on campus for his second visit with us. He is a very busy man, and so we're thrilled he was able to carve a few days out to be with us. We've kept him busy. Some of the people in this room have been in classes with him once or twice. Given the nature of his research, he's spoken to economics classes, urban studies classes, family planning classes, honors college classes, School of Education classes. So that's the nature of interdisciplinary research. You have many masters, I guess. A little bit of background on Richard. He's a senior fellow in economic studies and policy director for the Center on Children and Families at Brookings. He's also editor-in-chief of the Social Mobility Memos blog. His research focuses on social mobility, inequality, and family change. And you'll understand this as soon as he starts speaking if you haven't heard him before. Prior to joining Brookings, he was Director of Strategy to the UK's Deputy Prime Minister. So he comes to this topic with a global perspective and a unique set of experiences. And I will now step aside and let Richard speak.
Thank you, Bill. Everyone hear me okay? So thanks to Bill and to Rob and to Caitlin for having me back here for as he said, for the second time. And also I'd like to thank all the students who are doing the work on the AV, both the PowerPoint and the mics and so on. And also I'd like in advance, if anything goes wrong, to blame them for anything that would go wrong. So as Bill said, so I've been here before, but something's changed for me between my last visit and this visit, which is that although I may sound the same, I actually have managed to develop something else, which is one of these, which is my US passport. And actually, by the way, this is like the only country in the world where you get applauded for that. It's great. You try doing that in Britain, and people say, I became a British citizen. People go, oh, okay. America's like, it's one of the things I like about America is it is a thing to be a US citizen. It really does count to have one of these. Maybe counts today even more than ever. I was a green card holder until the very last day you could register to vote in my state. Became a citizen on that day. And there were 53 of us who took the oath on that same day from 47 different countries. And because it was the last day to register to vote, the Women's League were in, and every single one of us went from picking up our certificate of naturalization, and we walked to the room over here and signed and registered to vote. On the last day. Now, as it turns out, I kind of voted in Maryland, which was kind of heavily Clinton anyway, and as it turned out, that didn't matter either. But nonetheless, I cast my vote. And I was just kind of looking at these passports, because I've kept this one, which is my British passport, You never know. What's interesting about it is if you look into it, the language is some sort of similar and sort of not, and it is relevant. So at the beginning of the British passport, in the opening, the first page, it says here in the British passport, Her Britannic Majesty's Secretary of State requires and requests and requires, in the name of Her Majesty, all those whom it may concern to allow the bearer to pass freely without let or hindrance and to afford the bearer such assistance and protection as may be necessary. In the name of Her Majesty is why you let me in, right, and why you let me do this stuff. I mean, it couldn't be any more English sounding, could it? You just have to add, if that's no trouble, or I'm sorry to ask, but you can. Meanwhile, in the US one, some of the language, as you will see, is similar, but a lot of it's quite different. The Secretary of State of the United States of America hereby requests those to whom it concerns to permit the citizen of the United States named herein to pass without delay. Right there, in these two documents, you capture something quintessentially different about the two countries to which I now hold a passport. It's in the name of Her Majesty. Her Majesty became Queen by birthright. We have a hereditary monarchy. We still have some hereditary sitting in our House of Lords, in our upper chamber, passing laws, and they're there because they were born into the right family. I was in government. We tried to do something about that. It's harder than it seems in the UK. And that idea of a citizen as opposed to a subject goes to the heart of the American experiment. It goes to one of the reasons why America is the nation that it is, because that idea of inherited status is deeply un-American. Actually, the idea of social class is kind of un-American, or at least we like to think that it is. Position ourselves as a classless society. Watch Downton Abbey or The Crown or whatever it is, because that's fun to look at these kind of outdated class systems or whatever, right? Fun for you because you're not a subject of Her Majesty. For you, it's just like a fairy tale thing, right? But meanwhile, actually, it's a real thing. I'm not suggesting it affects your day-to-day life in that country, but it nonetheless is a significant difference between these. So imagine my disquiet as I go about my scholarly work to discover that the class system of the United States is more rigid than the class system of the United Kingdom. Maybe citizens here rather than subjects, but nonetheless the class rigidities that are passed on generation to generation turn out to be slightly greater here. And in particular, the way that those at the top of the class distribution in the US, the upper middle class, the top fifth broadly and above, not only contain their position very nicely, but perpetuate it over generations more effectively than in the United Kingdom. And yet that's not so widely known or seen as a problem because of the kind of myth of classlessness that has developed in the US. I should say, by the way, that I'm so grateful that so many of you have come out at 6 o'clock in the evening to hear this 3-hour lecture. It's really, really touching that you're willing to give so much of your time. I'm actually going to read from my book, So thank you for turning up for this reading. No, it's only an hour. Don't worry, I'm only kidding. In fact, I used to do quite a lot of business speaking, and you get feedback forms. I don't know, are you going to do you do like, I guess, feedback here? Is there a chance for you to feedback on the performance of the speakers?
We've never needed it before tonight.
I'm not necessarily proposing it. I'm just saying, you know, I was a business speaker for a while. You get these feedback forms, right, where you kind of, what did you think of this person? In fact, a couple of the academics in the audience have offered to sort of do a thumbs up, thumbs down, right? That's how I'm doing. And I remember I was looking through some of the feedback forms from a talk that I'd given. They were quite small, like postcard size things. And on it, this person had written, if I had an hour left to live, I would choose to spend that hour listening to Richard Reeve speak. Wow, so I thought it's amazing. And then I realized it carried over to the next side, So I turned it over and said, because it would feel like a lifetime. So I'll be quick. Right, so this is exciting for me because I have this book coming out, which I'm going to plug relentlessly. called Dream Hoarders, and I've never really had a chance, I haven't yet spoken about it at length in a structured way, so this is my first chance to do that. And I'm going to tell you a bit about why I ended up writing this book, which is about this. It's about the upper middle class. It's about this class rigidity at the top of US society. And one of the kind of moments when I was determined to write about it came in January of 2015, when a series of events took place, which for me were like a flashbulb going off and illuminating the class structure of this country. Remember this guy? Seems like a long time ago, doesn't it? Doesn't it? Just now thinking about it, it really does seem like a long time ago. It doesn't seem like days, does it? A couple of weeks. Anyway, President. For the young people in the audience, this is President Barack Obama, former President Barack Obama. So in January of 2015, he actually suffered something of a political humiliation. He had to embark on a kind of U-turn on an element of his own budget. And there was a series of events that led up to this. He'd published his budget with a series of proposals in it. And then in the end, he had to kind of perform quite a dramatic U-turn on this event. So I'm going to try and tell the story of how this happened. I tell the story at the kind of beginning of the book, and I'm going to try and do it in this way. And it's sort of, what do they say in Hollywood, based on true events. Okay, so I'm going to try this. So he's flying in this plane. He's on this kind of foreign trip, and there he is on the plane. Very nice plane. Where's he flying? He is actually flying from India to Saudi Arabia, for those who are interested. This is, I can't remember the exact date, but sometime in January 2015. And he's part way across. So he's flying across the Arabian Sea in Air Force One as part of his diplomatic mission. And he has to speak to someone on the plane. This woman, Nancy Pelosi, Congresswoman for San Francisco, she has to speak to the president quite urgently about this proposal in his budget. And the reason she has to do it, she's taken a phone call. She had a phone call from a colleague who says, we've really got to talk about this reform. And she's had a phone call from this guy, Chris Van Hollen, congressman for Montgomery County, where I live. My congressman calls Pelosi and says, we're in real trouble on this proposed tax reform. We've got to do something about it. That's Chris Van Hollen. He is now a US Senator, Van Hollen, one of the two, the junior senator for Maryland. Pelosi says, no problem, I'm on Air Force One. I happen to be with the president. So I can go and talk to him right away. I've just got to walk down the corridor past these blokes looking out the window. God knows what they're doing. Is that actually the president there? I don't know what's happening here. Anyway, so I've just got to sneak past these blokes. I don't know who they are, and I'll find him. I'll go and talk to the president. No problem. The president's in his office on Air Force One. There's a knock at the door. As I say, based on true events. Hi, Barack, Mr. President. It's me, Nancy Pelosi. Congressman for California, look, Democrat. And I've got this thing stuck across. Anyway, I need to talk to you about this budget thing. He's like, fine, okay, let's talk. What's the problem? She said, Van Hollen's ringing me, everyone's ringing me, it's a nightmare, we're being politically killed by this thing, we've got to do something about it. He's like, okay, I'm listening. Okay, Nancy, I'm listening. I'll hear you out. What's the issue? And she says, this proposal that you've got is just not going to work, right? We can't do this, we're Democrats, we can't do this. He says, I'll think about it. All right? Thanks for bringing it to my attention. I'll think about it. I just need to go and discuss it with my policy advisors. And having had a discussion with my policy advisors, I'm going to kind of think about it. And then he's like, all right, I've thought about this. I'll do something about it. So he calls the White House, says, hello, White House. We've got to kill this tax thing. Again, please don't assume this is a verbatim report. You got to get rid of it. Everyone's, Nancy's persuaded me. She was just on the plane. Chris called her. She's going to have to kill it, right? The very next day, this chap, Eric Schultz, who was the president's spokesman, announced the reversal of this policy and said it was, quotes, a distraction from the president's attempt to reform higher education. It is the only example I've been able to find in recent political history of a president asking his own party to not support an element in his own budget that he just published before it even reached Congress. Bear in mind, the budget wasn't going to pass anyway. Okay? So this is a measure in a budget that wasn't going to pass that he's had to take out anyway under pressure from his own party. Now, Van Hollen and Pelosi are liberal Democrats, I would say. Was that right? They're definitely they're not conservative, they're more on the liberal side. Nancy Pelosi more than Van Hollen. Certainly, people who'd expect. So what was this plan? What was this terrible thing? It must have been something regressive. Was he planning to introduce a tax break for rich people? No. He was planning to take away a tax break for rich people. But the problem is, these are the median incomes of the constituencies that Van Hollen and Pelosi represent. So they're liberal, but they're pretty affluent districts. This is the median. So the median household income, where they are compared on the right to the US median household income. The people who vote for them are roughly twice as rich at the median level as the average American. Right? So they are quite rich. They do get these tax breaks, but a lot of these people are pretty liberal and would probably actually kind of support a degree of redistribution and kind of so on. It was a particular tax break. It was the 529 College Savings Plan tax break that Obama proposed, not to retrospectively take the value, but to say in future it's not going to get the same tax break. The way the 529 College Savings, does anyone hands up who knows what the 529 plan is? Okay. The way it works is that if you save into it, and it accrues capital, you don't pay any capital gains tax on it when you take it out at the end. Okay. Now, actually, you only pay capital gains tax if you're a reasonably high earner anyway. And in order to pay capital gains tax, you have to get a capital gain. So you've got to have saved a fair amount, and then it's got to have got more valuable. In addition, many states will offer you an income tax break on your 529 savings. So Maryland, where I live, allows my wife and I to save for our 2 kids $250,000 per kid, and we can set that against Maryland income tax. So we can put $10,000 against our Maryland income tax thing. So that's 6%. I think the current Maryland income tax is $600. Now, $600 is only $600, but on the other hand, they're just giving it to me for free because I'm saving a bit of money into my kids' college savings account. It's amazing. Meanwhile, and by the way, I didn't know about these college savings plans till this argument blew up. So thank you, guys. Amazing, you're saving me money. I'm like, we've got to open these things. It's incredible. Like the federal government and the Maryland government are going to give us money for free. It's incredible. I then realized that there was a mortgage interest deduction. So now we own a really expensive house because it turns out that's the same. I'll come on to that. So they're rich constituents. Now let's look at who has these college savings plans. And so this is kind of who are the people that have got them at the top, and who are the people that don't. So this is all families, and at the bottom it's just the families who've got a kid in college. And it's telling me what proportion of those people who have one of these plans come from the different income brackets. So half of the people, of the families that have these kind of plans have got a family income of $150,000 or more. 3 and 4 roughly have got 6-figure household income or more, right? Because it's hard to find the money to save from college savings if you're on relatively low incomes. But if you're on reasonably high incomes and then you're incentivized to do it, as I am by Maryland and the federal government, then it doesn't make any sense not to do it. If you think you're going to be paying for college at some point down the road, it's crazy not to do it, right? Financially crazy not to do it. Meanwhile, if you look at kind of families who don't have savings accounts, completely different income distribution. It turns out that once the kids are in college, you see a slightly different number, but by then it's kind of too late. Right, so people so lower income families, their kids get into college, we better help them. But you're not getting any capital gain on that at that point anyway. To get a capital gain, you have to really put it in early. In fact, Barack and Michelle Obama themselves front-loaded their 529s. There's another rule, which is amazing, which is if you've got loads of money, you can put it in and then spread it out over the following 7 years against your tax breaks. So they put in $400,000 in 1 year for their kids. Again, crazy not to, they had the money. And he gets an amazing tax break for it, which to his credit, he tried to get rid of. And then Pelosi and Van Hollen did their jujitsu move. And the truth is that it was unbelievably unpopular among the constituency that really mattered. And this guy, Paul Waldman, who writes to the Post, and I quote him in my book, said this, which is that this had really, really gone at this particular constituency. It wasn't just going to take our money away. We're going to take away the money that we need to pay for our kids to go to college. And college is expensive if you've read the newspapers recently. Okay, so that was something that was virtually sacred to the upper middle class Americans. This was about education. This was about saving, so it was rewarding saving. It was about the future. It was amazing. And so it kind of hit this, and for me it was like, boom. Okay, wow. No wonder we can't change the tax system when even kind of relatively liberal people do it. What people forget is that this was a tax break that was long being proposed by Republicans. In fact, it reached Bill Clinton's desk towards the end of his second term, and he vetoed it out of hand. He was like, are you crazy? Why would I give a tax break to these people? They don't need it. Vetoed it. Bush wins, through it goes. Okay. So over time, what was a regressive Bush-era tax cut turned into something that the most liberal Democrats in the land will call each other across the world to protect because their constituents are so angry. Don't mess with the American upper middle class. That was the lesson. And I would be surprised if anyone goes near this issue for 10 years, not more. All right, having seen what happened. So that's my moment. And then I do a lot of work on intergenerational mobility, and that makes me even more determined to do some work in this space. I thought, I'll write a book. Dream Hoarders. Available in a bookstore near you. June. Available for pre-order on Amazon right now. Feel free to get your phones out. I won't mind. Pre-orders, they're helpful because it makes them think, oh, look, there's a real buzz around this book. So, talking about class, how do we know what class people are? I said upper middle class. So my book is, look, how the American upper middle class is leaving everyone else in the dust, why that's a problem, what to do about it. That's what I'm going to talk about. My publishers, Brookings Press, are like, can't we just say upper class? All right, everyone knows upper class, it'll sell much better, it'll be upper middle class. It's very clunky. And I refuse to go to upper class because actually there's a problem with saying upper class. A, no one thinks they're upper class. So immediately position it as being about somebody else. And B, it doesn't capture quite what I was trying to get at. If you ask Americans what class they are, the answer is middle class, right? So that gets really boring after a while. 9 in 10 Americans define themselves as middle class. Always have, by the way. There's a Gallup poll from the 1930s that found the same thing. So if you've got this nation that insists on calling itself middle class the whole time, A, you have politicians that are literally only ever going to be in favor of the middle class, because that's 90% of the population, but it also means a lot of nuance is lost in the definition. So Pew now breaks it down in their survey. So they ask, what class are you? Are you lower class, lower middle class, upper middle class, or upper class, right? So in the US, you have to break down the middle class. And that's where most of the action is, as you can see. You force this choice. This is pre- and post-recession. And what you see has been a shift in people's class definitions, kind of as a result of the recession. But nonetheless, the pattern's pretty clear. Everyone's in the middle. More people, just over 1 in 10 were willing to say they were lower classes after a recession. And the number of people who are willing to define themselves as upper class in the US is really low. All right? Not surprisingly, given how you think about yourselves as a nation. That's why you watch Downton Abbey, so that you can see what that would actually look like. It was 2%, it's now 1%. This is the 1%, the Occupy Wall Street group. But this group here, it's actually dropped a little bit. You see some of these have dropped and more people have kind of gone down here. So that's now down, I think, to 14% from 19%. It'll probably come back up a little bit. It's low post-recession. So, it's not 20%, but it's getting towards 20%. Self-definition. Most sociologists define it occupationally, and they get to a figure of, say, 18, 19%, something like that. I mean, there's lots of different ways to cut it. This is one way to cut it, just ask people. Now, Occupy Wall Street made a big thing of we are the 99%. Okay, so top 1% running away with everything, everyone else is stuck in the same boat. This is the kind of chart you would produce if you wanted to show this. This is market income before tax redistribution. This is in 2011 dollars, and it's their real income over time since 1979. So there you got the top 1%. What's happened to their real income over that time? Now this chart would make you think, why hasn't he written a book about the upper class? Why hasn't he written a book about 1%? What about all the Occupy Wall Street stuff? We are the 99%. Look at us. Look, down here. Now, this is the top 20% with the top 1% taken out. That's the middle 40%, and that's the bottom 40%. So 80% of the US population are in these two lines. 19% are in this line, and 1% is in that line. Okay? This is a very good Occupy Wall Street chart. It's very easy to look at this chart and say, look, we're basically all in the same boat, aren't we? We're all being left behind by that lot. Now, the income you require to get into this top quintile, top fifth of the income is now about, market income is now about 118,000. So you're comfortably into six figures household income, right? So you have 120,000 in your mind as that kind of income rate. But these people, they're the ones that are really running away with it, right? Darn them. We're all on it together. But you'll notice the left-hand scale. This is a good trick, by the way. Always change the scale. Because it's got to go up a long way. It's got to go up to $2 million because they make a lot of money. So the only way to show the change in their income is to change the axis. So I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take the 1% out altogether. Forget about the top 1%. And now I'll do bottom 40, middle 40, top 20%, except the 1%. So without that pull that the 1% give, what's happening to the upper middle class? If I define them this way, between 80 and 99, so the 19% just below that 1%, compared to the bottom 40% and the middle 40%. These are the six figure, these are $120,000 a year plus kind of people, right? Now, to get into that quintile. So this is the average income for those different quintiles, not pulled up by 1%. Because if I put the 1% in, I can make the line go up much higher. But that's not fair. I'm interested in post 1%, without the top 1%. And I suggest that they are doing pretty well too, by comparison to everybody else. Change the scale, change the politics. But the trouble is, if you think of the world like this, don't you dare come after my 529. Do you know how hard it is to make ends meet by the time I've saved my kids' college, paid for their private school fees, paid for my massive mortgage, thanks to the tax break, but still, it's a lot of money. You know, he's got a skiing holiday, school trips get more expensive. You know, I'm barely making even here, right? And we're working really hard. I'm part of the 99%. No, you're not. Okay, you're part of the top 20%. There has been no increase in income inequality in the bottom 80% of the income distribution. None. The income inequality is the same below the top 20%. All the actions there. And sure, it gets more as you go up. But this lack of awareness among the upper middle class, the six-figure income Americans, is a huge political problem, as the 529 thing showed. Now, I'm interested in this kind of thing. This is an intergenerational quintile income transition matrix. We make them all the time at Brookings. The days fly by. Amazing fun to make. Amazing. What this tells you is, again, quintiles, 20%. Now, I've split the population up in 20%, the poorest to the richest. Where do they end up? This is not my data. This is Chetty's data. 34, it's probably a little bit higher, up to 8, 37, 11. What it's telling me is, how far does where you're born in the income distribution affect where you end up as an adult, right? If in a world where it didn't matter at all, everyone would be 20%. You'd have a 20% chance of making it into any of those quintiles, regardless of where you came from. In practice, there's quite a lot of stickiness. And most policy attention, most mobility work focuses on this lot. The persistence of poverty. Intergenerational poverty. Turns out most Americans really want lots of upward mobility. They hate the idea that if you're born poor, you stay poor. It feels like something morally wrong with the society in which the fact you're born poor means that you end up poor yourself. Doesn't that feel wrong? But what about that lot? The top right-hand corner. Isn't there something also morally troubling about a society in which the top quintile are perpetuating themselves even more effectively? Turns out that's a less popular idea to kind of go at. Now, you can't have more upward mobility, relatively speaking, without more downward mobility. That's the way the math works. Everyone can get better off than their parents, but if you want a society where people are moving up the income ladder, you need people moving down it. We need some of our kids to be downwardly mobile. I talk to my kids a lot about this stuff. And some of it's sunk in because is this going out? It's going to be published, isn't it, this video? Okay, all right. So he won't watch it. My high school junior comes home with his report card and says, I have good news and bad news. The good news is you always go on about the need for downward mobility from the top. The bad news is here are my grades. So it's both good and bad news, Dad. So that's true. With those grades, you're definitely going to be downwardly mobile. And that will create more room at the top. practicing what we preach in our house. Plus it means all the 529 money can go into the other kids, so we're sold, we're fine. Basically, you just have to, I've only got, just bet on one kid. I'm just betting on him. I'm writing a book about this. It's called Dream Hoarders. You should definitely buy it. One of the reasons why you might be a dream hoarder or kind of care so much about this stuff is because actually the inequality I just referred to means that, let's say my son, as I've already talked about him, let's say that let's say our household income is on the 90th percentile, right? So in the middle of that top fifth, right? In the middle of the upper middle class. So that's where we are. Let's say he drops to the middle. He goes to the 50th. Right? It just becomes an ordinary American, right in the middle of the distribution. The thing is that fall is a bit higher in the US by comparison to Canada and the UK, and it's getting higher over time. Because of that income distribution, it's just a bit further to fall. It's not look like dramatic numbers, but actually, given that there's not much difference in other countries, the simple fact that the gap between the top quintile and the middle has grown means that if he is downwardly mobile, relatively speaking, he's fallen further. And so my anxiety as a parent about how far my kid falls down the income distribution is not unrelated to the nature of that income distribution and the cost that it might feel. So I wrote a piece for the New York Times called The Glass Floor, that basically upper middle class parents use a glass floor to keep their kids up, especially if they're not very bright, right? The ones you really want to worry about are not the ones that are bright, they'll be fine. It's the dumb ones you want to worry about. Turns out the best thing you can do for your dumb kid is get them into a four-year college. Get them through four-year college, and then by the time their employer finds out they're dumb, it's too late. That's what my statistics find. It's the best predictor. So I took kids and I ran the regression. You take kids who are really dumb at 15, 16, who do quite well in life, and you're like, well, how the hell did they manage that? Turns out they got a four-year college degree. It's the ultimate way to fool people. So four-year college degree is not only used as a way to promote upward mobility. Four-year college degrees are at least as important as a way for those of us in the upper middle class to prevent downward mobility. Because I can assure you that every parent I know where I live, every single one of their kids is going to go get a four-year college degree somehow or other. It cannot be the case that they're all good enough for that, can it? But they know the labour market, these parents. They are not stupid, and they're going to get them a four-year college degree, whatever it takes, right? They're going to hold them up. The question is whether that's fair, whether that's what we want, and that's the challenge I'm going to try and make. I'm going to do a couple more of these because, as I said, this is now not an intergenerational income quintile transition matrix. This is an intergenerational wealth quintile transition matrix. Told you, the days fly by. Wealth, even stickier than income. Look at that. Does this have a pointer on it? This is one of those things where you, like a doctor thing. No? Seriously, doesn't it have a... Yes, it does. Oh, darn. All right, well done. They're amazing. I thought they'd made a mistake. Look at that. Look, 44%. Yeah, we're keeping it in the family. So why is this happening? Two reasons. This perpetuation of upper middle class status is so it's sticky. It's true for income and wealth, as I've just shown. Why? There's two reasons. One, education and skills. And two, opportunity hoarding. I'm going to take them in turn. One of the main reasons why, and I've just referred to the glass floor, kids from upper middle class households end up in the upper middle class themselves is because they hit the labour market with lots of skills, lots of qualifications. Some of it's just signalling from having gone to college or whatever, but the truth is they go to good schools, their parents are very engaged in them, they get lots of extracurricular, etc. So actually, the labour market is probably quite meritocratic. In fact, it looks like it is quite meritocratic. You know, the labour market doesn't say, I know you're useless, but you're posh, so I'll hire you. That's what we do in the UK. Well, it's what we used to do. It's what the army used to before, actually. Now the army's gone on meritocratic. So we don't know what to do with those people anymore. The labour market doesn't do that. The labour market will find you out, right, by and large. If you're any good, you'll be okay. Right? And if you're not. The trouble is the upper middle class kids are good. They are well educated. They have gone to good schools. They are highly skilled. Not just cognitive skills, but non-cognitive skills. They've had this incredible upbringing in various ways. Their families are more stable. Their neighborhoods are safer. Their schools are better. They've learned to play tennis, whatever, right? So when you interview them for a job, they are incredibly accomplished. And so if you're going to give the job to the best person, the person best qualified, meritocratically, it will perpetuate itself through the process of human capital formation. That is why the upper middle class are obsessed with education. They're right to be obsessed with education in the current labour market. They're right to obsess about their kids' grades and colleges and all the rest of it. And they're really good at it because they want their kids to be highly competitive in the labour market. They, by and large, succeed, and guess what? Their kids are highly competitive. Guess what? They do well. But there's another thing too, which is opportunity hoarding, which I'll come on to. This is actually an intergenerational quintile transition matrix for educational status. So if you take education, which obviously changes over time, but you say top 20% educational distribution, 46% of that type. So all I'm doing is talking about the top right-hand corner now. So the inheritance of educational status is actually even greater than wealth, which is even greater than income. Now, it takes a higher level of education to get into that top quintile now than it did, but nonetheless, education seems to be passed on even more strongly. And then, of course, education will influence income, which influences wealth, and so on. So I've mentioned education. This is a class breakdown of who gets a 4-year college degree. So this is completion rates for those born in who are 25 in 88, 92, and 25 in 06, 10. So slightly older than me and ridiculously young. And then say what proportion from the bottom 40%, middle 40%, and top 20% got a 4-year college degree, completed a 4-year college degree. And what you can say if you're one kind of politician is that we've nearly doubled the number of kids from the bottom half, the bottom 40% getting a college degree. Yay, go us. Different politicians might say, yeah, but the gap's widened, if anything. Because now not all, but the majority. And you'll see as we get into what kinds of colleges they go to, the gap gets worse. So the basic kind of message is the expansion of higher education in the US has disproportionately gone to the top. And therefore probably worsened intergenerational mobility. Probably made it worse. Because you've got more of the kids from the top getting qualified, which means they're more likely to do well. So that's just any 4-year college degree. Now, which college do you go to? Now, we're talking about selectivity earlier. It's incredibly difficult to measure selectivity of colleges, so this is somebody else's measure that I think Raj took from somewhere else. Again, bottom 40, middle 40, top 20. This is now the ones who go to college. Okay, so go back here. This is of the ones that go. This is 4-year college. Now, they could go to any college, and I don't know if they complete it, but just they go, right? Where do they go? Well, kids from the bottom 40% go to 2-year colleges. It's just over the majority. Then some to non-selectives, and then to selective, and a tiny, tiny, tiny few to Ivies and elites. Look across, picture's clear, right? Just 1 in 5 of those from the top quintile will go to 2-year, the rest will go somewhere else. And a lot of them go. Almost all of them go somewhere, right? So you'll see this huge class distinction in the kinds of college. Not only do you get a college degree, but what kind of college do you go to? And they can drill in even further. Now, look at it from the other perspective, which is of different kinds of colleges, what proportion of their students come from different income backgrounds? So now I'm saying, what are the students in those institutions, right? The other way around. So start over here. You take Ivies, Ivy Pluses, the elite colleges, the most elite colleges, and 2/3 of their students are from the top quintile, from the top 20%. 2/3 of their students are from there. So they're overwhelmingly upper middle class institutions. And you can see as you kind of go, selectives get a little bit more equal, and then non-selectives much more so. So it's the college going, it's the kind of college that you go to, and it's college completion. Drill down even further. This is all Raj Chetty's data now, new data. With some specific colleges. These are the ones he used. You can pull out any college now. This data set now allows you to look at every institution in the US. The parents' income quintile. Again, it's what proportion of the people at your college are from these different quintiles. So now I can look at an individual institution. Harvard, 70% from the top income quintile. And I think this is like 16 or 17% from the top 1%. So back to the Occupy Wall Street thing, from the top 1%. By comparison to how many are from down here? From the bottom 20%, the next 20%, the middle class, next one up here too. There are more kids from the top 1% at Harvard, backed by their parents' income, than from any income quintile below them. And more kids from the top 1% than from the whole of the bottom half of the income distribution. You can see similar patterns elsewhere, and then when you move to kind of community colleges or more public access, you will see it going the other way around. So just unpicking those numbers, The journey through higher education is incredibly different for kids from different class backgrounds. We know this, we have more data on it. The question then becomes, what does public policy do about that? If we see it as a problem, which I do. Back to this guy. Okay, he's called Eric Schultz. He says he's going to pull the 529 thing. We can't do this. Here's Eric Schultz again, making this. Look at his face. You know that idea we had yesterday? Changed our mind. These guys, they have a tough job, right? I think current guy has the toughest job of all. But, you know, it's tough, right? Because one day you're selling the media on this and then you're saying it's what it is. So this is, and classically, distraction is political code for, oops, got the politics of that wrong. I don't want to say it's a bad idea, because it's not a bad idea, it's a great idea. But I also realize that I'm getting hell for it, from the press, from the think tank, from everybody around it, so we're going to have to kind of move back. Let's dig in just a tiny bit more to the 529s, and then move on to some other policy areas. There's a different way to look at the 529s. Now this is by quartile. So from the bottom 25, this is the only way we can get it, because it's the way the Treasury produced the numbers. And for some reason, when people talk about education, they use quartiles. And when we talk about income, we use quintiles. Nobody knows why. It drives me crazy. If anybody could do anything about that, I'd be really happy, because it's literally you switch between quartiles and quintiles all the time. We have long arguments about which is better at Brookings. No, I'm more of a quartile guy. Really? I like quintiles. Yeah. What about rank percentiles? Yeah, I like them too. But it makes the same point. You know, the nice thing about these numbers is it doesn't matter, right? Because now I'm showing you what percentage of people have one of these 529s, and then of the ones that have one, how much money is in it, which is the right-hand scale, which is this one kind of here, right? In the survey, they had to use to produce this number. This is one person. There's one person who's in this bottom quartile who has a 529, and there's no money in it. You know, good for them. Generally good for them, but Jesus, they're not going to get any capital gains tax relief on it. What are they doing? Whereas these people are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. You can also push it up, the richer they get, top 5%, kind of, etc. But they got proper amounts of money in their 529s. This is for all age kids, by the way. So as the kids get older, they like to get more and kind of stuff. But this, you know, so there's it's not most of them, but still, it gets to most of them as you get higher income. That's where the money is for this tax break. That's why it's so regressive. Don't yet know how regressive, because the real interest kicks in when they take out the capital, and then we know what the capital gains is. We can find out, and we're trying to. On the subject of tax breaks, can I just say, as a new member of the US upper middle class, thanks, Uncle Sam. It's amazing the stuff that you will let me say against my income for tax purposes. Just incredible. Here's a few. Again, who gets the benefit from these tax expenditures? Bottom 40%, middle 40%, top 20%. These are called upside-down tax subsidies. That's why they're called upside-down tax subsidies. This is public spending in the form of a tax break, but it's spending by any other name on all these different things. Employer-sponsored health insurance. Now here, actually, the middle 40 don't do too badly. Right? Actually, they do quite well out of that. But still in the middle 40, they obviously don't do so well, because they're much less likely to have an employer. Then you see all the others, capital gains, etc., and mortgage interest. Mortgage from federal government and then from local too. And it's not capped. So the more mortgage interest you have, the more valuable the tax break is to you. Again, amazing. Just bought a house in Chevy Chase, Maryland. Won't tell you how much it was, but it was quite an expensive house. Amazing tax break. The UK got rid of that 20 years ago. Right, what are we doing? Why are we stuck there? Anyway. Point is clear that it's upside down. These are upper middle class tax breaks, many of them. And like the 529, guided with like laser precision to the bank balances of people like me. To the bank balances of the people who have been doing so well from income trends in recent years. And yet, by God, it's hard to touch them. Even the incoming Treasury Secretary, who mentioned we might actually reduce tax rates, but do so by getting rid of a lot of these deductions. Wow, that didn't last very long. By the time the National Association for Housing and everybody else, and the Republican, right, this stuff's hard. Obama wanted to cap it at least. Very hard to get at. But I think part of the reason for that is because we've kidded ourselves that we're part of the 99%. The other thing that we do is a bit of what I call in the book opportunity hoarding, and I'm going to stop pretty quickly. Opportunity hoarding is not just where our kids are more skilled, but where we've rigged the market in their favour. So you might, if you were, I wouldn't say this in the book exactly, but you might use a word like cheating, just a little bit, just to give us even more of an advantage, or kids a bit more of an advantage, right? They don't like that, because they don't like to admit it, because fair play. You know, America is somewhere where you have to videotape every touchdown and look at it from every angle and wait for 20 minutes to see whether or not it was really a touchdown or not. Because we're such believers in fair play. It either was a touchdown or it wasn't. Honestly, it doesn't matter. Yes, no, just, yes, it's a game, it's a game! Right. But interestingly, other areas we're not so worried about fairness, maybe. I'm not going to talk about all these in any detail. You have to read the book. Exclusionary zoning, legacy admissions and internal projects. So zoning has become one of the biggest problems facing the US, economically, socially, etc. Zoning, the way we regulate land use, has become one of the ways the upper middle class protects their position. And in particular, exclusionary zoning. So restrictive zoning, single family dwellings, etc. are a big part of the way that we protect ourselves, protect our assets, which are also subsidised by the federal government through mortgage interest relief. Thanks, Uncle Sam! And then we make sure that it doesn't lose value by zoning out all the people that might reduce the value of our neighbourhood, right? So those zoning laws actually go back, they were pretty explicitly racist. They're not explicitly anything anymore, but they're implicitly classist for sure. And by the way, that means they have racial consequences. But by God, they're a good way to protect yourself. Now, what's happened to the cost of rents? Many of the people in the room know this stuff better than me, so I won't spend much time on it. But look, housing's getting more expensive by comparison to how much people earn, right, in America. Why is that? Well, it could be this. This is the number of lawsuits that are based around land use regulation from 1940 to 2010. It's an interesting measure, different instruments, but it's just like how big a deal is land use regulation in the US judicial system? The answer is pretty big. There's a lot of lawsuits about land use now, highly regulated. This is actually from Morrow, who's a PhD student somewhere, who showed that Los Angeles used to be zoned for 10 million people. It's now zoned for 4.3 million people, which coincidentally is exactly how many people live there. So it used to be that we thought Los Angeles could have twice as many people in it as it does now. What happened? Zoning. Mayor of Seattle tries to change the zoning of Seattle. That didn't last very long. Massachusetts has tried to change it. It's tough because we've incentivized the people on the right side of zoning not to give it up. There's a macroeconomic challenge here. Housing affordability is a problem. Labor mobility is a problem. Wealth inequality is a problem. But meanwhile, why would I, as someone on the right side of these zoning laws, change them? Seriously. They're protecting the value of my house in Chevy Chase. And partly because that's because of the school. And all the other things that go with it. You know, why would I allow you to rezone? So my self-interest, subsidized by the federal government and by the Maryland state, is to keep those zoning restrictions in place. But collectively, hits economic growth, hits all the things I've just talked about. Most importantly, is another mechanism by which this class separation that I've talked about continues and deepens. The other one is legacy admissions. What's that about? No one else in the world does that. Now, I know it's only a few, it's the top, and when you talk about this, the people at the Ivy, you know, they don't like talking about it, and they don't release any of the data on it. And the head of Harvard admissions said recently, we do give the applicants whose parents came, the legacies, a slight tip, just a slight tip in their favor. These are the admissions rates for 5 selected colleges for legacy applicants and non-legacy applicants. A slight tip? Maybe a bit more. So, if all that's true, or part of it's true, what do we do about it? It's a public policy book, so I have a list of 7 things we can do. They're not they're not comprehensive. There's a bunch of stuff we could do. We could certainly end these opportunity hoarding mechanisms, break it up a bit. That will mean we'll have to pay a price. Let's make the rich pay for all this stuff, because some of it's expensive. Hey, the rich should pay. Everyone agrees with that. Oh, wait. I think that rich people are people a lot richer than me, is what this chart tells you. So this tells me that half the people who make more than 100,000 a year think you need to make 500,000 a year to be rich. They're the upper middle class. They're happy for the rich to pay more tax. They just don't mean themselves. Because you change the definition of rich depending on where you are, right? So there's a problem of consciousness and social conscience. In this book, The Age of Reform, Hofstadter said this about the progressive era. You can read it, and I've got this thing here now. where this bit is what? Affair of the conscience. I genuinely have come to believe that unless the conscience of the American upper middle class is somewhat awakened, then it will be very difficult to bring about the political reforms which I believe are necessary to make this country the one I thought I was coming to, one of more equal opportunity. Right now, America, some of America, has something of a problem of a sense of entitlement. And I mean the upper middle class. So they're very good sometimes about talking about the people who have sense of entitlement to welfare or whatever. I think they feel pretty entitled to their upper middle class welfare too, as Obama found out to his cost. And until and unless we recognize that we are not the 99%, that we have done pretty well, and that we will have to give something up. Not much, but a bit. A bit on zoning, a bit on school admissions, a bit on taxes in order to help the others. Then we won't get anywhere. But that will require us, as I've said, to recognize that we are not the losers from inequality trends, but the winners. And I've written a book about this. And I'm on Twitter. And I have a newsletter. And I've gone on too long. I'm finished. Questions? So, I've gone on way too long, I apologize, but questions? Questions, problems? Yes, gentleman here.
So I've been working with the Chinese data about the social mobility index, and we all know that it is geographically uneven across the metropolitan areas in the United States. So for instance, relatively higher intergenerational social mobility index here in Las Vegas compared to metro and northeastern part of the country. So I was more interested in how that appeals to the millennials or the young parents if they make a destination choice for the job searching, labor market related migrations. So that partly, in my opinion, that can partly resolve some of those issues by redistributing some of those young workers.
Sure.
And have you ever, did you touch a little bit of this, the geographic mobility in your book, or?
A little bit. So I agree. The problem is that geographical mobility has declined. Certainly cross-state it has, cross-state lines. It's particularly low for American-born Americans, less so for immigrant Americans. Americans move less than they used to. The question then becomes why? Would it be a good idea if you're a relatively low-income American to move to a higher opportunity place? And you know where that is now from the Chetty data, from the maps, right? Because you might do better, but your kids will almost certainly do better, right? And Chetty can also follow the kids that have moved to see whether it is the place they moved to as opposed to their parents or something else. And it is. It makes a difference. And historically, I think that's what Americans have done. Why aren't they doing it now? Big question. Don't know the answer. But we did just do the land use regulation thing. And we do know that housing affordability in the high opportunity places is a big and growing issue. Why? Because of zoning and over-restrictive land use regulations. This should be an area of total bipartisan consensus. Because basically, the free marketeers, and it is, should want a freer market in land. And the people who are worried about opportunity hoarding like me want people like me to stop rigging the market in favor of people like me. It's actually, so I forgot the name of the authors now. In fact, I think it's in one of my, it's where this comes from. This paper, the Ganong-Shoag paper, also shows mobility by skill level. And what it finds is that higher skilled workers are still moving, but lower skilled workers are not. And they relate that, suggestively with a strong correlation, to land use regulation. And so a kind of really simplistic summary of that research is onerous land use regulation makes it harder for lower skilled and lower income people to move to higher opportunity places. It doesn't really hurt me. In fact, it probably helps me in the short run. But in the long run, it'll hurt all of us. Because part of America's economic dynamism has come from exactly that kind of geographical mobility, which we're now hindering through our mesh of overly restrictive land use regulation. Yes?
So our professor told us the last time he came here, he talked about housing. And I think the essence of your talk was that if our policy push is we want to make American homeowners, and that's the big push, what happens to the price of houses? Well, if everyone's going to buy a house, it goes up. I mean, isn't that the same problem with the push for higher education? We want everyone to go, and so it's just the price gets more expensive. So shouldn't we we shouldn't subsidize any housing. We shouldn't subsidize any education. And then the market, because you said the rigging. The market, let the market decide. Don't rig the market.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I basically agree, except with one caveat, which is that we should subsidize for those who need the subsidy, which is lower income people. Right now, we subsidize the people that don't need it at least as much, and in some cases more. So we subsidize housing much more for the upper middle class than we do for others. So it's who you're subsidizing. Let's at least cap it, right? Let's at least restrict it. Let's say you could only put, it's what Obama tried to do, a certain amount of mortgage interest against tax, rather than it just being the sky's the limit, right? Literally, you buy a $5 million house and you get amazing tax break, $1 million, a bit less. So it's ridiculous. And then you could have a kind of freer market in it. I think with higher education, the concern there is that you take two elements of the American dream, which are college education, owning a house. You have a weird subsidy system for both, distorted in my view. You have a private market that's predatory in many cases. Well, look at what's happening with the lawsuits right now. Trump University, the lender, what's the name of the lender that's being sued? You know, for predatory pricing and so on. And so what happens is you sell this dream and then you allow in relatively unregulated private lenders to lend to you to pursue that dream. The market then turns against you, or things don't turn out very well for you, and then you're screwed. Really screwed. The problem with the housing market when it got hit was for poor people, and particularly people of color. Black Americans didn't have much wealth before the recession. They didn't have any by the end. Net black wealth virtually hit zero as a result of the recession. It wiped out black wealth. And you look at maps of DC that I know well and others, and it's like, look at what happened to the house prices over there. Right. Where I live, flat. Barely moved. Didn't go up, which is upsetting for those of us who want them to go up, but didn't go down. Wow, it's incredible, right? And there was predatory lending, there was inappropriate lending, you had a subprime market that was going to go. I put it to you that we may now have a subprime market in college lending too, for kids who have sold the dream, who go to for-profit 4 years, who don't complete or complete with a qualification that isn't worthwhile, pay massive interest rates, fail to pay, go into bad credit, can't get a mortgage, and so on. So just as there was a subprime market in housing in the US, I think we could be seeing the beginnings of a subprime market in higher education.
Quick follow-up. I think that you say that it's easy to say, oh, it's these predatory schools, but what about UNLV? Don't we have an 80% fail rate? I mean, doesn't that seem kind of bad? Or is it?
That doesn't sound right to me, but...
What is it then? What percent of UNLV students start to graduate with a bachelor's?
It's around 50.
Oh, what is it?
So...
It's around 50.
50%?
Right, so the questions then are, what's the value of the education you got? What is that signal to the market? How much did you pay for it? And how much did you have to borrow for it? All of those are the variables that go into it. Because if you come out, even after 2 years, but you've done some valuable learning and an employer values it and pays you and you pay off the debt, no problem. If actually you come out of somewhere that was just shockingly bad, right? UNLV has a certain brand value, right? I don't know this. But what happens when you go into the labor market and you say, I did 2 years at UNLV, it didn't work out for the following reasons, but I learned this, I want to get a job. Do they just go, well, forget it, drop out? I don't know. But I do know there are institutions where if you say, hey, I did 2 years at institution X, an employer will be like, yeah, you're more of an idiot than you look. Just rule them out. So I don't know the answer, but all those variables go in, right? How much did you pay? How much did you borrow? How much did it turn out to be worth? That's why the people borrowing $100,000 to go to Harvard Law School have no problem at all. The more you borrow, as a general principle, the better you'll be, because the people who borrow a lot tend to go, except for those for profits, where people quite often borrow a lot at high interest rates for a lousy education. That's the problem. Yes?
So I'm interested in the political implications. Obviously, I'm hearing your story, and Trump's election seems like this is the anger. This is the these are the folks who only have a high school education.
Yeah.
So A, the political implications, and then now B, So they elect Trump, but now B, we're hearing revocation of Dodd-Frank, deregulation, and all the things we're concerned about transparency. And it looks like, yes, the folks had good faith to elect Trump to shake things up, but what's going to happen to that good faith?
So let's do another lecture just on that. And there are others in the audience, like Rob, for example, who know much more about the demographics than I do. So what I would say is this. First of all, let's not understate the racial component of the vote on both sides. Hillary did not turn out many of the supporters that Barack Obama did. And actually, when you controlled for the racial attitudes of whites, the education gap significantly narrowed. So there was this sense among middle-income whites, not poor whites, middle and lower-income whites, but this was not just poor whites. That they were kind of, the line that was used by one social was that people were cutting in line, getting ahead of them. It's not true. But people had that view. That then got racialized. And that's quite a toxic combination in many ways, but it's one that the president used very effectively, I think, because it did kind of play into this sense of grievance. My deep concern about this is that some of the concerns that were properly being addressed towards the position of black Americans, which I talked about last time, but not this time, are somewhat being overshadowed by the desperate desire to understand the white working class and the white middle class. He only won by a football stadium's worth of votes, the slenderest of margins in a few states. You know, life didn't get any better for black Americans any time, right? So, but I'm reading all the commentary now and looking at the scholarship, and this is like, what's happening to whites? I don't in any way wish to diminish some of the concerns that particularly poor whites have and the overlap, in fact, of some of their disadvantages. I will say this. If there are people, whatever race kind of background, who feel as if there is a sort of rigging of the system, whether that's trade or housing or college or whatever, and that some people just really seem to be making out pretty well. You know, those people over there, they seem to be doing pretty well. My kids are doing pretty well, and I don't feel like I am doing that well. I refer you to my earlier charts about income, and all the other things. They're not entirely wrong to think that. There is a group of Americans that have been making out pretty well, the top 20%, and within that, the top 10%, the upper middle class. Most of whom didn't vote for Trump. Some did. And so I can't pass out all these different things, as political scientists are doing this forever, the effect of racism, the effect of education, and so on. And there's a nostalgia for the 50s and the world, a real nostalgia for a world in which a modestly educated white man could make a decent wage. Well, that world ain't coming back, and arguably it should never have existed. Right? Because one of the reasons why modestly educated white men were able to make money was because of sexism and racism. Turns out that if you keep large parts of the labour market from competing with you, you can do really well. And not much global competition, way! So yes, it was amazing to be a modestly educated white man by comparison, but less so now because the rents that they enjoyed have disappeared. And I think to some extent some of that anger is a reaction to a loss of rent. Their fathers did much better than them with the same levels of education. Well, I don't know if you noticed, but the world has really changed. And so whilst it's important to try and understand what happened, there is a danger, particularly among some classes, of being, dare I say this, overly compassionate towards some of the people who voted the way they did. I respect the outcome and all of that. But let's not forget where the really disadvantaged are. And that's white and black, by the way. But it wasn't by and large the people who propelled Trump. And there I think there's a reckoning coming. We have to adapt to the world as it is. Yes?
Thank you. Richard, do you have a geographic analogy where somewhere in the world, a country somewhere reversed the trend of a redistribution upwards as you've been describing? Singapore, New Zealand. Has someone done it, or is US truly exceptional in its structure and history, such that there's no policy parallels we can use as leverage if we are interested in a reversal of this trend in distribution upwards?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm afraid I don't have a great answer, but I will definitely think about it because it's a question to which I feel I should have a better answer. I can think of countries where there's been an arresting of the rise in inequality. Most recently, actually, the UK inequalities come down. But the underlying trends towards increased inequality are across the world. They are. The increased returns to human capital, the impact of technology. And I think the best you can hope for is that in some countries, some of the Scandinavian countries, Canada, there's been a concerted effort to try and equalize human capital development. And that really is the only way to go, it seems to me. I think that trying to kind of regulate the labor market towards more equal outcomes is not the way forward, especially in the US. It's really about what happens before people hit the labor market. And so you are seeing more concerted investments in a number of countries now around that kind of human capital development. And I think in continental Europe, and to some extent the UK and over, a renewed emphasis on vocational education and 2-year and so on. I genuinely think that kind of vocational education and community colleges are kind of jewel in the crown. But they're not treated as such, partly because we in the upper middle class are so obsessed with 4-year colleges. So I think that's beginning to see that. There's a couple of bills that have been put in the US, but it's really too early to tell, and the underlying forces are so strong. I don't think there are many other countries in the world where you see this rigidification getting worse by comparison to the US. It does, because one of the differences in the US is that it really is very geographical. The separation of the upper middle class can be seen in our cities. And in fact, I'm reasonably convinced by the evidence that the segregation of the upper middle class is at least as great and growing as of the poor. And so you see this it's not just an economic segregation, it's a cultural segregation, an educational segregation, occupational segregation. And so actually, and I think one of the things we did see come back from the Trump thing was the surprise of many people in the upper middle class of the fact that someone like this could not only become the candidate, but also to win. And it was through extended family that many of us, I'm speaking for myself now, were actually able to kind of actually deal with people who were enthusiastic about Trump. I'd say to my mother-in-law, I can't believe it. I'm so surprised he's doing very well, given what he's like. And she said, I'm surprised you're surprised. Nobody I know is surprised. We knew who he was. Because blue collar, lower income, people on the other bit of my chart, right? And so actually, and it's very striking to me how many of my colleagues have said, the only Trump voters I know are extended family. Not my friends or my colleagues. I don't know, maybe we'll people in this audience or whatever. The upper middle class marry each other more and more. College-assorted mating's greater. We live together more and more because our neighborhoods are segregated. We go to the same colleges, as I've already shown. The same kinds of jobs. We hang out in the same kinds of gyms. And then we wonder why we're out of touch. Right? Because that level of segregation is actually unhealthy. I don't just think it's unhealthy economically. I think at some point there's a distance that becomes an empathy gap and an understanding gap on both sides. So it's easy to disdain those who are not of our class as deplorable, or as Barack Obama said, clinging to their guns and Bibles. And you can bet that people hear that. And on the other side, a disdain for experts and facts and coastal elites and all this politically correct nonsense. And so you see this symmetry of disdain across that class divide, which was very vivid in the election. But, do you want me to finish?
Yes, I apologize. I always hate to...
I have a payoff line.
Please.
Which is just, it's how I finish my book. So I shouldn't tell you, really. Although you could go into a shop and read the... my assessment of the American dream is that it's not dead, that it's alive and well. But it's alive and well for only some of us. That the American dream is actually being hoarded towards the top of the distribution. College, great house, all the rest of it. And the question really becomes not is American dream alive, but who gets it? And the real test for us in the upper middle class, if we look ourselves in the mirror, is are we willing to share it rather than hoard it? And we're going to find out.
Thank you again, sir. Thank you for joining us. Richard will be around for a few minutes if you have a question you didn't have a chance to ask, but I want to be respectful of your time and get you out of here near when we said. And I will do that in closing with a commercial for our next lecture, which will be March 1st. So is that 3 weeks from today? And we will have retired General John Allen here. General Allen served at the highest level of the American military, led our forces in some of the most dangerous parts of the world. And he will be here to talk. The title of his lecture, if you haven't seen it already, is The New 100 Years' War, Causes of Regional Instability and the Rise of the Islamic State. So we could not have a more informed expert to talk about that topic. I hope you and your friends will be able to join us. And again, thanks for coming. Wow.
It was great.
Thanks for coming.
It's my